Today we're sharing with you all the tips you need to know to make an animal costume as we share today how we made Elijah this giraffe costume. But before we get to that, let's see the bloopers. So dear. Move over, mate.
No.
Got that out of your system? Oh, I thought I stitched the hood backwards. Don't tell them our secret. Great. Well, if you're about to whine about food, you're about to get into trouble. Hi crafty people, and welcome back to part 2 in this video series about how I made Elijah this giraffe costume. Last week I shared the cloning process of how I took the jumper and track pants that fit Elijah and I turned that into the pattern of how we were going to make this hoodie and track pants here that Elijah's wearing. The hoodie and the trackies are the base of this costume, but today I'm specifically sharing the details about how you can make it into an animal costume. If you're interested in making a giraffe costume like this, then I will be sharing with you the templates of how you can pattern out the ears specifically to make ears like this for the giraffe and the ossicones. The tips that I'm showing today will be helpful for you even if you're not making a giraffe, but if you're making any sort of animal, the tips that I'm sharing can be adapted to suit any sort of animal ears or tail or spots or any design that you're making for a different animal as well.
What if an animal doesn't have a tail like birds?
You could do a feathery tail on a bird. This here is Elijah. Elijah, do you want to tell us a bit about this costume?
So, these are the two ossicones, and these are the two ears. There's plastic inside them to help them hold up, and the ossicones have what are they called? What is it?
Stuffing?
Stuffing in them, and we put brown spots on them. It's brown felt, and the yellow is yellow polar fleece, and I've got black hooves.
Black for the hooves. And you've also got a tail here that we made as well. So the mane and the edge of the tail were made from a suede trim that we used. Excellent. Thanks for those details, Elijah. Very good. It was a lovely experience to get to sew this with Elijah and to get to teach him a skill that I'm really interested in and also make something that he really enjoyed wearing to Book Week and he's really proud of too. If this is your first time on our channel, then welcome. My name is Marie and this channel is where I share all of my sewing projects that I make for my kids, myself and our home. I do hope that you enjoy this video as you're watching it, and if you do, I'd love for you to subscribe to come back and see some of our future videos. But with all of that being said, let's get making.
Let's get making!
Yeah.
My mum makes an animal costume.
We started by constructing the pants. So the first step of that is to sew the curved part of the pocket bag onto the front of the pants, and then to sew the pocket bag closed on the bottom so that obviously it is an enclosed pocket. And then we can sew this front of the pant leg to the back of the pant leg, sewing it down the outside leg seam. We didn't sew it closed down the inner seam because we want this pant leg to be flat so we can easily sew the spots on it before we then close over the leg, because it would be too hard to sew the spots on once the leg is an enclosed tube. Similarly with the construction of the jumper, I wanted to start the process of making it but leave it flat enough to sew the spots on. So I attached the front and back together at the shoulder seams, and then I sewed the sleeves into place as well, and then left it like that so that I could put the spots on. The last step before I was ready to make the spots was to just hem all the sides of the front patch pocket that I was putting on the jumper. With that initial construction out of the way, we were ready to start making the giraffe's spots, and this was a great time for me to involve Elijah in the project. Elijah was able to draw out the wobbly, lumpy shapes that we wanted to use as the spots, and then he cut them out of the paper, and I used those paper patterns that he was designing to cut out the spots out of the felt that we had. We made about 60 spots, and then Elijah helped me to place where he wanted them on the pants and on the jumper. We put them over the side seams that we had already created as well, just to create the illusion that there wasn't any seam there. And once we had placed them where we wanted them to be, I put a pin in the middle of each of the spots to hold it in place before I was ready to sew it. We also did the same process on the jumper.
Up around your head.
So this is the front with the pocket.
I'm going to put 3 spots on the pocket.
Okay, and then this is the back, these are the sleeves, and then these are the hood parts, and we will need some on the hood as well.
Okay, we might need to cut some more out for the hood then.
Oh, okay, you want to just do the jumper
Only
first?
about 10.
We'll see if we get any spares, because there's a lot here. Right, shall we
I want
spread them
to do
out?
the heart ones.
You'll notice that I haven't sewn the pocket on yet because I'll need to be able to sew the spots on top of the pocket before I then sew the pocket onto the jumper itself. The spots are made out of felt, so they're not going to fray, but I am going to sew around the outside of them using a zigzag stitch because I'm sewing them onto a stretch fabric and I want them to be able to stretch along with the fabric underneath. I have my machine set to a medium to wide long zigzag stitch, and I'm using a brown thread on the top to match the spots and a yellow thread on the bottom to match the underneath. I did find that my machine kept skipping stitches, so I played around with some of the settings a bit, and I found that changing to a jeans needle worked a bit better with using this sort of thick felt on top of polar fleece. This part of the process was by far the longest process. Sewing on all of these spots took probably just as long as the rest of the construction of the entire costume all put together. You'll see here in this clip I'm sewing the spots onto the pocket, and they are overhanging over the edge of the pocket, and that's so that I can sew them onto the jumper as well, and it will sort of seamlessly blend in so that you can't tell that the pocket is there. Once I placed the pocket back on top of the jumper, I was able to pin it down so that I could sew using a yellow thread, sew the pocket in place, and then I changed back to my brown cotton so that I could finish the zigzag stitches around those spots so that I could attach it to the jumper itself. After the spots were finally all sewn on, I was able to finish the construction process of the trackies and the jumper. So I did this by pinning down the inner seams on the pants and also on the jumper going down the sleeves and the side seams. I sewed each of these seams together using a stretch stitch. Next, I joined both of the legs to each other by sewing around the crotch seam. At this point off camera, I tried the costume on Elijah to see how it was fitting before moving on to making the tails and the details for the hood. To make the tail, we're cutting out one of these quadrilateral shapes here, which is wider at the top and thinner down the bottom. And we're going to be putting on some very small spots on this, sewing around them in the same way that we did for the rest of the costume. And then we're going to be putting the right sides together of the tail and sewing down this long edge. When we flip it out, it will create the nice tail shape that we want. And we're going to put the seam in the back center so that you can't see it from the front. This suede trim here we were able to buy by the meter at our local craft shop. So I bought a meter of that, which is going to be used for the mane and here for the bottom of the tail. So I've just cut off maybe 15 centimeters or so, and I have rolled it up so that it will fit within the bottom thin part of the tail. And then I'm just using a hand sewing needle to sew through it. I did need a pretty thick needle because sewing through this suede was quite challenging. It's quite thick, but once I got the hang of it, I was able to sew it all in there nice and securely. Next, I moved on to making the mane. So I have the two sides of my hood right side together, and I'm putting this suede trim in between those two sides so that it's pointing down onto the right side of the fabric. I'm just sewing the very front part of this mane in together at the moment and then taking it off so that I can hem this front side. This may seem a weird order of operations here, but the reason I'm doing it like this is because I need to have this front edge hemmed, and then I need to sew the hood onto the jumper before I can sew down the rest of the mane. The reason I'm doing that is because the mane is going to continue down the back of the jumper so that it looks like the mane is continuing down the giraffe's back. And because I'm doing that, I need to make sure that it's lining up at the neckline first before I can continue the mane. So because of that, I'm hemming this front side first, and then I'm pulling my jumper out and working out where the middle of the back of the jumper is, and I'm going to be cutting a straight line down the back of the jumper where the mane is going to continue. Then I'm going to sew the hood onto the jumper, making sure the two edges of the hemmed part that I already made are meeting at the front of the jumper and touching each other. And once the hood is in place, I am able to then close over the rest of the hood, going all the way down, making sure that the trim is tucked inside the hood so that I can sew it all the way down the back of the hood and down the back of that slit we made in the back of the jumper. Here's how the jumper part of our costume is going so far. So we've got the mane here sewn into the hood and it's going down the back. And next we're going to be making these ossicones and ears. And I've patterned out what I want them to look like. So these were my prototypes after a couple of attempts. And I have my pattern pieces here. If you're looking to make a giraffe costume as well, I'll scan these into the description box. There'll be a link there if you do want to download and print these. But this is the rough shape of what the ossicone looks like. You need to cut two of them. And then to make the ears, the main piece for the ear looks like this. And the overlay piece like this goes on top. And this is to create the top fold here, sort of to make it that three-dimensional shape. And then this is a piece of plastic cut out this size, which will be slid into it to give it that bit of extra structure so that it doesn't flop around. So we're going to cut out those pattern pieces and I'll show you the construction process. You'll need 2 of the main ear pieces and 2 of the overlay pieces, and we're going to start by sewing these 2 pieces together along the very top part. If you're using the pattern that I have linked down below, there'll be some notches there to show you how to join it together. Once you've sewn this top part together, we're going to be sewing these little dart shapes together. This is what gives it the 3-dimensional shape. This is what it looks like once you have sewn all of those parts together, and we're going to do the exact same thing on the other one. Once they are both sewn in this way, we're going to put them right sides together and sew around the edges, leaving open the short side of it. So we're just sewing along the top edge and the curved lower edge, leaving open the sides so that we can turn it out the right way. The last part of the ear is to add in some plastic to give it some structure. We had this folder here that was already damaged, so I used that. And once I slid it into the hole that I left in the ear, I was able to close over that hole, sewing using my machine, but making sure that I don't sew through the plastic. To make the ossicone, you either need to cut 2 of the shape out or do what I have done here, which is to cut 2 of them out but connected on the fold at the bottom of the ossicone. The first step that we're going to do is to fold together each of the little triangle cutout shapes, like little darts at the top of each of the 2 ossicone pieces. And then with right sides together, we're going to sew around the top part and down one of the sides of the ossicones. Once sewn, you can turn the ossicone out the right way again, so our stitching is on the inside, and then we're able to stuff it and then use a hand sewing needle to close over the hole. I did find that the ossicones I made here in this video were a little bit tall for what I needed, so I have adapted the pattern that I've linked down below, and yours will turn out shorter, the correct height. With the ears and ossicones done, it was time to attach them to the hood. I did try it on Elijah to work out where I wanted them to be positioned, and do keep in mind that they will sag down a little bit once you have attached them, so you want to put them a little bit higher than where you think, and then they will droop down slightly. To sew the ears on, I did a straight stitch down the back of the ear, so from the front there were no stitches shown, and then I finished it off by doing some hand sewing stitches to cover over where the seam and the stitching was on the back. So I'm just kind of bringing the back part of the ear down over the top of where my stitch line was. I also hand sewed the ossicone in place, just doing a bit of a slip stitch. And I did sew some spots on the hood off camera. The reason I didn't do it before when I did the rest of the spots was because I wasn't sure where the ear and ossicones would be positioned, so I wasn't sure where the right place for those spots would be. We're going to move back to the pants now, and we're going to sew the tail on at the same time as we do the waistband. To sew the waistband, we're going to sew the short sides of this piece of fabric here together to make a circle, and then we're going to fold it over so the wrong side is on the inside, and we're going to slide that waistband over the top of the pants. I'm sandwiching the tail in between where the waistband and the pants meet, and I did decide to quickly base stitch the tail in place before I then sewed around the rest of the waistband, just to make sure it stayed in place as I sewed the waistband on. As I sewed the waistband on, I left a little gap so that I was able to thread some elastic through the waistband, and then I closed over the hole. The very last thing on the pants was to add these little cuffs at the bottom to make it look like hooves, and I'm going to show you the process of that here on the wrists. I did the same thing when I did the pants. I measured around the bottom of the sleeve and I multiplied that measurement by 0.75 because you do want the cuff to be tighter than the rest of the sleeve. Then with that measurement, I did basically the same as what I did with the waistband. I sewed the short side together, and then putting it with wrong sides together, I folded the fabric over lengthwise, and then I matched up the edge of the sleeve with the edge of the little cuff that I made and sewed around it. And when you flip it out, it is attached nicely with the stitching on the inside. The very last step that I did off camera was to hem the bottom of the jumper, and then it was all finished. So here it is with the mane attached, the tail, the ossicones, the ears, all the spots and the little hooves. And now I'll show you what it looks like with Elijah wearing it. So there you have it. That is how Elijah and I made this giraffe costume. If you have a go at making a giraffe costume or any animal costume using the tips that I've shared today, I would love to see it. So you can tag me in a photo at mymum.marie over on Instagram. If you haven't liked this video yet, I would love if you would do so, and subscribe as well to see some of the future videos we have coming out on this channel. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, you might be coming up towards Halloween, which we don't really celebrate here in Australia, but this might be an option of something that you could make as well for yourself. So hopefully this video video was helpful for you, and until next time, go get creative and we'll see you
ya
later.